Lee Grant received her first nomination for an Oscar in 1951. Her name was listed in a government book 2 days later. She was placed on a blacklist. The FBI followed her around and tapped her phone. The strain caused her marriage to fail. To pay for food, she pawned her jewelry. She was unable to work on TV or cinema for 12 years. She made $4,000 instead of $75,000. In order to survive, she taught acting covertly and went by false names. She had lost her youth by the time Hollywood allowed her to return. Her narrative didn't end there, though. She is still directing at the age of 99, and you will be astounded at how she managed to survive. Lee Grant, whose true name was Lyova Haskell Rosenthal, was born in Manhattan on October 31, 1925. Her parents were Jewish immigrants from Russia who fled the terrible tragedy in Odessa. Family members who probably never made it out were left behind after her mother, Lydia, and her sister departed. They settled into a little flat at 148th Street in Riverside after arriving in New York penniless. Abraham, her father, was a teacher and realtor who never stopped working, attempting to sustain the family throughout the Great Depression. Life was made much more difficult by the fact that Abraham's Polish Orthodox parents disapproved of his marriage to Witya due to the heated situation. As was typical of immigrant families without official documentation, Lee's age was never clearly stated. It was occasionally recorded as 1925 and other times as 1931. However, her skill was evident from the beginning, regardless of the year. When she was just 4 years old in 1931, she made her stage debut at the Metropolitan Opera, one of the biggest venues in the world. In Laura Colo, she portrayed the abducted princess. She was performing with well-known vocalists, when other children her age were still learning how to speak in complete words. Her life would be shaped by the scholarship she received from the local playhouse as a result of her performance. There was a lot of pressure in her home behind the cheers. Witya, her mother, had sacrificed everything for Lee and forced her to enroll in acting, ballet, and opera classes simultaneously. Lee was playing differently than other kids. She was always performing, always was. With every year that went by, the weight of her mother's expectations increased. Seeking praise at any costs, Witya even made her kid act in blackface at school one day. Her mother's mental state totally deteriorated by the time Lee was about 10 years old. Lee was the one who discovered her and called for assistance following a horrifying suicide attempt. She never forgot that moment. Lee hit yet another peak at 11. She became one of the youngest dancers accepted to the American Ballet Theatre. However, it was short-lived. Her body started to change too quickly. Overnight, her height increased a few inches in a matter of months, which can spell the end of a ballet career. Everything she had trained for started to go away as she grew too tall to be paired with male dancers. Her dance aspirations were the family's only hope. They had no idea what to do with that door closed. They were poor. Lee worked on the fire escape in their small Bronx apartment. Her dad put in as much labor as he could. However, it was insufficient. Their income came from New Deal initiatives. Lee occasionally went to bed hungry. By the time she was 12, she was the one making money while her peers attended school by acting, singing, and dancing. Her income covered rent, utilities, and food. She suffered lifelong wounds as a result of missing out on a typical upbringing. She became Lee Grant at the age of 17. She desired to blend in with Broadway's world and move on from her past. Her first significant part was in Joy to the World in 1948. She had no formal theatrical experience, which astonished critics, but she knew how to handle pressure. By the time she was 16, she had trained under Sandy Meisner at the neighborhood playhouse and had already appeared at the Met Opera at the age of 4. Ballet, opera, art lessons, and even Juilliard after high school were all encouraged by her mother. She tried out for Detective Story in 1949. Despite being only 22, she refused to play the part of the young girl. Instead, she requested to read for the 40-year-old shoplifter. The character's voice was inspired by girls she had heard on buses in New York. She was dressed in a brown jumper from another show that was a size 18. Her life was transformed by her audacious decision, which earned her the Critics' Circle Award. She later trained with Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio, where she learned Stanislavski-inspired method acting. She portrayed the same character alongside Kirk Douglas in the 1951 motion picture adaptation of Detective Story. She received her first Oscar nomination at the age of 25. She married screenwriter Arnold Menoff that same year, in 1951. The Communist Party was one of his affiliations, something she never really agreed with or understood. Lee eulogized actor J., but they had first met through one of his plays. Everything changed after Edward Bromberg's burial, when the government was held accountable for his passing. She received a booklet 2 days later. It contained her name. In red channels, she had been called a communist sympathizer. She was placed on a blacklist. Her Hollywood career terminated at the age of 24. She was prohibited from movies and television for the next 12 years, from 1952 to 1964. She lost everything when she refused to give names in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee. She had already created a stir in early television before being placed on the blacklist. She portrayed Rose Peabody in Search for Tomorrow in 1953. In order to build tension, each episode concluded with her perhaps contaminating the soup. Don Knotts played her silent brother, but that role also terminated when a Syracuse store owner sent a postcard to CBS accusing her of being a communist. Suddenly, she lost her job. The goal of advertisers was to avoid controversy. In 1950, she arrived in Hollywood for her film debut and discovered a more sinister side of the business. The sexism that pervaded the studio structure was something she personally witnessed. Unsuitable recommendations were made by producers. By 1930, women accounted for only 20% of casts, compared to 40% in 1920. The 5 major studios, Warner Brothers, Paramount, MGM, Fox, and RKO, held the most of the authority. No matter the cost, Lee was not going to give in. She took home the Cannes Film Festival's Best Actress prize for Detective Story in 1952. However, the blacklist's weight overshadowed that honor. Her reputation remained damaged. She was unable to work. She was unable to speak. She had no choice but to wait. She was able to find employment during those years. Little plays with fictitious titles. She continued to give powerful performances. Her fire was nonetheless noted by critics. Her early improvisations on Broadway were unvarnished and heartfelt. She stunned everyone at the age of 17 by letting loose a wild side during an acting practice. She carried that flame and that moment with her. Simple parts were not enough for her. She consistently chose the challenging, multi-layered, and painful ones. She continued to have issues even in the 1950s when she made a comeback to programs like The Goldbergs. Despite earning significantly less, she had the same billing as male actors. There was a salary disparity. Additionally, shows featuring Jewish or ethnic actors became too risky for networks when the Red Scare struck. In order to be safe, they canceled certain shows. She joined Broadway's Stalag 17 in 1953. That drama gained not just notoriety for its plot but also for its backstage activities. Jose Ferrer, the director, was stern. Actors clashed with him. With her own beliefs and method acting training, Lee resisted. Although their arguments turned into Broadway rumors, they revealed something more profound. Lee Grant has no intention of giving in to pressure. When it all came apart, Lee Grant was only 23. She had recently received her first Oscar nomination in April 1951 for her performance in Detective Story starring Kirk Douglas. She was going to be a big star, according to everyone in Hollywood. However, her name was included in a government report that listed those suspected of being communists before she was even able to attend the ceremony. Her spouse, Arnold Manoff, was the cause. Manoff was a member of the Communist Party, according to a director called Edward Demetric who testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Lee would not criticize him. She claimed that she was completely unaware of his political views and that their marriage had always been troubled by them, but that it made no difference. Her name was now included with 150 others in a book called Red Channels. At the beginning of her career, she was blacklisted and prohibited from appearing in films and television shows. The fallout was swift. She had been cast in Desire, a Streetcar, among the decade's most important plays. However, the producers took her out overnight. She had no time to dispute or bid farewell. Her studio deals were abruptly terminated. She was untouchable one day and the next big thing the next. Calls ceased. Projects vanished. According to Kirk Douglas, she had one of Hollywood's brightest futures, but it was taken away from her. It all transpired in a few days, and she was obliterated. The FBI began to monitor her. Her phone was tapped. They dispatched individuals to track her and overhear her discussions. She had the impression that someone was always listening, even while she was at home with her daughter Dinah. Her marriage began to deteriorate. Everything seemed unsafe because of the pressure from the surveillance. There was no one she could trust. She claimed that trying to live while being monitored all the time was like dancing on a pin. The tension and worry persisted. Things worsened by 1953. She was fully blacklisted, as was Arnold. They didn't make any money. Manoff was forced to write under Joel Carpenter, a fictitious name. And he didn't make much even then. He wrote for television programs such as The Defenders, Naked City, and You Are There. Lee just used her jewelry as collateral to purchase food for Dinah. Along with other band families, they shared a small building and worked to support one another. Lee provided acting lessons for money and embarked on tiny acting jobs under false pretenses. She earned barely enough to survive, but it was insignificant in comparison to her previous earnings from movies. She had lost her prime. She referred to those years as her ingenue years, when she ought to have been a rising star. And they lived in poverty the entire time. Her brain was affected by the stress. She experienced memory issues following her interview with the House Un-American Activities Committee. She was unable to recall the names of her close friends. The harm never disappeared. She continued to battle with it decades later. She later said that writing I Said Yes to Everything, her memoir, made her face the suffering. The blacklist wasn't the only thing that broke her, she realized. It was the harm it did to the mind, the embarrassment, the stillness, and the terror. Her brain had been rewired. She converted her Manhattan apartment into a makeshift acting school in order to make ends meet. She taught 15 to 20 kids a week from 1951 to 1963. Each session cost $25. Sandy Dennis, who went on to win an Oscar, was her first pupil. Lee filled her students in on everything from the blacklist's destructive effects on people to casting couches and dishonest bosses. The class became legendary because of her candor. Her monthly income of $300 to $400 was insufficient to support Dinah. However, it preserved their lives. She eventually received an invitation to study at HB Studio, which also housed well-known students including Maureen Stapleton. In 1960, her marriage to Arnold Manoff ultimately fell apart. They had spent 9 years together. Tommy, Michael, and Eva were his 3 children from previous marriages. Thinking she was supporting her spouse, Lee had joined the Communist Party as a result of him. But even while they were fighting for their lives, she discovered that he was having affairs. She was only earning $1,200 annually as a teacher at one point. In 1964, their divorce was finalized. Manoff passed away at the age of 50 from a heart attack in February 1965, 1 year later. She always thought he was killed by the stress of being on the blacklist. She began therapy in 1961. She was inconsolable. 3 times a week, she charges $45 for her sessions, which is about half of her income. She paid roughly $3,000 over the course of 18 months. However, she discovered why she consistently accepted offers from strong men. Her parents came from other countries. Her father didn't show any emotion. Approval had always been her goal. She was able to confront her pain and disentangle her past and present with the aid of therapy. It also laid the groundwork for her future work in mental health films. She continued to perform even in the most difficult years. Between 1951 and 1964, she performed on stage. Blacklisted performers were protected by Actors' Equity. She performed on shows like Wedding Breakfast, A Hole in the Head, and Arms and the Man, earning $55 each week. She occasionally did more than 6 evenings a week. She received an Obie Award in 1965 for her performance in The Maids. She also gained directing experience while working at the Actors Studio. Her pals from the theater supported one another. They were all aware that they were fighting the same battle. Her pre-blacklist salary of $75,000 had decreased to about $4,000 by 1962. She fled to Europe and accepted menial TV jobs in Italy and the UK for $500 to $800 per episode because she was on the verge of being evicted. In private, she operated under false identities. In 1963, she even had a facelift in the hopes of looking younger and landing a role. However, it all left her feeling alienated in her own field and is like she no longer belonged in the nation that had previously welcomed her. In 1964, her exile came to an end. For someone with ties to the House Un-American Activities Committee, her attorney performed a favor. It was sufficient to clear her name. She was cast as Stella Cernick in 71 episodes of Peyton Place in 1965. She was finally able to express everything she had been suppressing in that role. She received an Emmy for it in 1966. Out of the entire cast, she was the only actor to win. "You deserve it, kid," murmured Frank Sinatra as he approached her. She had never felt secure in Hollywood before. She co-starred with Sidney Poitier in the 1967 film In the Heat of the Night. She had recently lost Manoff to a heart attack, thus her part as Mrs. Colbert was emotionally charged. She exploited her own anguish when Poitier informed her that her husband was deceased in the movie. She really did cry. The camera was left rolling by the director and editor. It turned into one of the film's most impactful scenes. It wasn't a performance. It was the release of her agony. She played the role of Miriam Poehler, a tough agent in the drug-filled Hollywood industry, in Valley of the Dolls later that year. She depicted on screen her personal experience of the business's cruelty and desperation. Despite the negative reviews from critics, the movie was a box office success. She had experienced that same darkness, so her acting seemed authentic. In 1962, she wed producer Joseph Fury. Initially, he was also not trusted by others in the industry. They believed that he might have shared Manoff's political views, but he supported her and assisted in her recovery. Belinda was the name of their daughter. She had never experienced stability before their marriage lasted. She was nominated for another Oscar in 1969 for The Landlord. Given her own progressive views, it was stunning that she played a bigoted Long Island mother. She claimed that she based the role on members of her own family, demonstrating how racism may go undetected. Critics were shocked that she consented to utter such terrible words on television. Her performance demonstrated that she wasn't scared to take on challenging jobs, even if doing so caused discomfort. She eventually won an Oscar for Shampoo on March 29, 1976. She was 50 years old. The audience was astounded by her remarks. "I must have really wanted this," she said. "Why would I wear an old wedding gown otherwise?" For years, she had lied about her age. The mayor assisted her in changing the year of her birth on her license when she returned to Hollywood in 1964. Her 18-minute performance in Shampoo was one of the shortest Oscar-winning performances ever. However, it was crucial. For the first time, she remarked, she felt as though she had no enemies. She received another nomination that year to play a Jewish refugee in Voyage of the Damned. For her, the narrative was personal. Her family had experienced their own anxieties during the Holocaust, and she was Jewish. Despite appearing in just 8% of the movie, she gave a strong enough performance to be nominated for another Oscar. She received a second Emmy for The Neon Ceiling in 1972. The pivotal moment was that movie. She began contributing ideas for the plot and directing. Although it created conflict on set, it demonstrated that she was prepared for more. Her second Emmy victory came at the same time she began to give directing some serious thought. She was 52 by 1977, although she continued to act younger. In the movie Airport 77, she was cast as the wealthy, resentful woman who made fun of everyone. The way older actresses were portrayed as irate, forgotten women was reflected in her part. Her character getting pummeled, according to one critic, was a vicious instance of overt misogyny. It demonstrated the severity of the industry's treatment of women after a particular age. She received another nomination for The Swarm in 1979, but the movie was a box office failure. Only $10 million was made, compared to $21 million spent. It was regarded by critics as one of the worst films ever produced. At 53, Grant was afraid that this failure would put a stop to her career once more. So she turned around. She began directing after moving behind the camera. She gained a second life in Hollywood as a result of her choice. She refused to wait for approval any longer. She'd forge her own route. Something that nobody anticipated occurred in Hollywood in 1980. Everything changed when a woman appeared behind the camera. Lee Grant was her name. She took a risk at the age of 55, when most actresses were being marginalized. Tell Me a Riddle, her debut feature film, was directed by her. It was more than just the plot or the performance that made it momentous. It was the fact that women wrote, produced, and directed the entire movie. In America, that had never occurred before. The film, which starred Oscar-winning performers Melvyn Douglas and Lila Kudrova, was based on a subdued, poignant tale about an elderly Jewish couple. The fact that Lee Grant funded more over $1 million to make it, however, was the true surprise. During that time, women-led projects hardly ever received that level of funding. Furthermore, the film was not buried after it was completed. Filmways Pictures acquired it, and during the director's fortnight at the Cannes Film Festival, it was even shown. At the Edinburgh Film Festival, it also took home the Best Picture and Best Actor awards. This was the first time that many people realized that a woman could successfully lead a big-budget movie. Lee Grant shattered yet another obstacle only 6 years later. She received the Directors Guild of America Award in 1986 for the Nobody's Child movie on CBS. It was based on the real-life experiences of Marie Balter, a lady who was confined to psychiatric hospitals for 20 years. Marlo Thomas earned an Emmy for her role as the lead. The film's portrayal of America's treatment of those suffering from mental illness was intense, unvarnished, and brutally honest. Since no woman had ever won in that category in the 51-year history of the Guild, Grant's victory garnered media attention. At the time, she was 59. Her victory was not limited to her gender. In a field that frequently overlooks both, she prevailed despite being an older woman. However, none of this was simple. She had won an Oscar for Shampoo in 1975. The majority of individuals believe that to be the pinnacle of a profession. However, it seemed like a dead end to Lee Grant. Her age was 48. And Hollywood had previously determined that she was too old for important parts. She became aware that she was gradually being erased that evening as she grasped her Oscar. Between the ages of 24 and 36, she had already lost 12 years of her youth due to the Hollywood blacklist. Time was hitting once more now. In order to obtain 5 years off her license, she even had to lie about her age and even went so far as to have supper with the mayor of Los Angeles. It had nothing to do with vanity. It was a matter of survival. She then began anew. After enrolling in the American Film Institute's Women's Directors Workshop, she created her first short film, which was based on a play in which one lady speaks and the other remains mute. She then battled her way back, this time as a director rather than an actress. She directed When Women Kill for HBO in 1983. People had never seen anything like that on television. Leslie Van Houten from the Manson family was among the actual ladies she had access to while incarcerated. She showed stories that were disregarded. Only 12 of the more than 1,100 inmates on death row were female. Before losing it, she revealed that many of them had endured years of abuse. The movie let viewers understand them as human, even though it didn't attempt to justify their actions. She then took an even greater risk in 1985. What Sex Am I? Was directed by her. An investigation of transgender individuals. Even using the term transgender on television might result in hate mail during the Reagan administration. Lee Grant nevertheless did it. She filmed actual people attempting to live their truths while traveling the nation, stopping in places like California, Texas, and New York. According to one assessment, her movie seemed more appropriate for the 21st century than the 1980s. It was described as brutally candid by another. Lee Grant had already opened the door 5 years before Paris burned down. She produced another HBO movie, Down and Out in America, in 1986. Reagan's programs addressed poverty in this one. In Minnesota, she depicted farmers losing hundreds of farms every week. She documented 3,000 manufacturing workers at a time whose employment were being moved abroad. Death threats were even made against her. However, the Academy took notice. At the Oscars, the movie tied for Best Documentary Feature. It was HBO's first Oscar victory. She therefore became the only Oscar-winning performer to get a second Oscar for documentary directing. As of right now, no one else has done it. Her work on television was as impactful. She had previously won an Emmy for The Neon Ceiling in 1971 and Peyton Place in 1966. A suburban mother who deserts her life was the subject of the second one. TV didn't typically tell stories like that. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, she received numerous Emmy nominations, particularly for her directing work. Making good TV wasn't all she was doing. She was demonstrating what television could be. She was the director of the 1989 documentary on domestic abuse, Battered. She conducted interviews with abusers and victims. Nothing was sugar-coated by her. The movie was shown to parliamentarians, in trainings, and in classrooms. It demonstrated that she was an outstanding filmmaker, according to People magazine. In 1990, she received formal gratitude for her efforts from LA County and the New York City Council. She also received her first Lifetime Achievement Award from Women in Film in 1989. However, her most startling incident occurred in 2023. She casually disclosed in an interview that she was born in 1925 and was 97 and a half years old. She had claimed to be younger for decades. IMDb and Wikipedia were also incorrect. She claimed that she had to remind them to act astonished because the reporter didn't even react sufficiently. In actuality, she had begun to fabricate her age when she was removed from the blacklist in 1964. Although she claimed to be in her early 30s, she was 39 at the time. She told falsehoods to friends, casting directors, and agents. She once claimed that in order to maintain the lie, she had to coach others around her. It had nothing to do with vanity. It has to do with finding employment. Subsequent research revealed that women over 50 receive 78% less parts than men in their age group. She detailed how she managed to avoid being placed on the blacklist from 1952 until 1964 in her 2014 memoir, I Said Yes to Everything. She declined to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee against her husband. She was blacklisted as a result. No TV, no movie roles. She was employed in a theater. Obtained teaching positions, and her spouse used fictitious names to write scripts. According to her, the trauma was so severe that she later lost the ability to recall people's names. Her brain seemed to have shut everything out in order to survive. However, she continued. She compared living through that period to dancing on a pin. She is 99 years old as of 2025, yet she is still intelligent and active. On October 31st, Turner Classic Movies is already organizing a lavish celebration in honor of her 100th birthday. In 1951, she made her Broadway debut. It was 74 years ago. She is still the oldest living filmmaker in Hollywood and continues to post on social media with her trademark red lipstick and gray hair.